And so, are you in the right headspace? I'm not talking mentally, I'm talking about headspace. Let's find out. Hey everyone, welcome back. So, this headspace issue is something that I've been diving into the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it's a far more nuanced than I would expect. Although I know this is not everybody's cup of tea, I think it's important to cover these bases. So there'll definitely be more shooting, especially in part 2 of this video, but this channel is more dedicated to the nitty-gritties of what makes a precision rifle precision. So without further ado, let's get into it. And so the best way I could think of describing this was to take a simple CZ action and actually blow it up 600% to show you what headspace is when you revert to it, as well as the effects of the headspace on the action. And so let's just take a break, because I can already hear it in the comments. I don't care about headspace, it doesn't make a difference. Well, as per normal, we did a bit of a vote, and as you can see in the results here, it turns out that about 33% of you have not checked your headspace, nor do you care, it seems. Well, I'm hoping that this might give you an indication as to why you might want to at least measure it, so you know whether it might be a consideration or not. So what you see here is obviously the barrel coming in from this side. You can see this side, the rifling, the leading edge, the chamber, and then this would be ideally, or this would be your bolt. So that would be that side coming into it. And the engagement between your barrel face and the inside recess of your bolt would be effectively your headspace. So if you were to put it like this and you take the round out, it would effectively be the space between the recessed face and the face of your rifle barrel itself. Now that measurement might sound simple enough for most people in terms of understanding headspace, but I think where it gets a bit more nuanced is the fact that that space affects far more than just what you would think between those two. It affects how your bullet engages with your leading edge or your rifling, the chamber length, and your extraction. So what I wanted to do was just dive into those little aspects a bit more and make sure that we're all on the same page. The reason why I'm saying that is during this setup and testing, I tested a bunch of different barrels and a bunch of different headspace recesses when it refers to the actual bolts itself. And I'll put it on the screen right here in terms of my measurements. And the measurements I'm referring to when I say the bolt recess might be easier seen on the Rimex over here. But this depth that you have over here actually varies from bolt to bolt from the same manufacturer. And this was my findings for the different bolts I've measured. And why that is important is you'll see that one of the CZs, the bolt recess was actually 40 thou. And what that meant was there's no way that you would actually be able to set the headspace for that specific bolt in that action to less than 40 thou, which some manufacturers might recommend. And so you might want to measure that headspace, set it with your preferred method. And there's two methods that's really used commonly. One is your barrel shims, which would be a shim that you install between your bolt or your action face and your barrel, which would then effectively change the spacing on your barrel, between your barrel and your bolt. Or the second is the bolt shims, which on the CZ, for instance, goes in between this gap over here, which then moves this face in and out. And you can see that because this space over here will change. And depending on your specific measurement for your bolt, you might need to shim it a thou, 5 thou, 20 thou, whatever it is, to get the desired spacing. And it's always important to note that it's one thing to measure and then put a shim in and then just think that you might be correct. But I find it far more useful to use a set like this to actually confirm that. So once I've shimmed it, I would actually start off by a 45 thou and move in to see where I can no longer close the bolt or where it gets snug. So that might be 41,000 for your Elis or 42 or 43 thou for your SKs and Lapuas. But we'll get to that because that is far more nuanced than just a set it and forget it number. And that has got to do with the chambering. You see, if we talk about the chambering, the leading edge and the rifling and the engagement thereof, what we're talking about is if you look at a standard rimfire round, it's got the engagement bands over here. Now this is not drawn to specific to spec, but this is just representation of it. And what we're talking about is how far the bullet engages either just the leading edge or the actual rifling when this bullet is pushed into the chamber all the way. And there is varying theories about this, but to test this for myself, I actually went ahead and grabbed a bunch of barrels and did plugs. So you guys have seen me using this stuff before. This is a 2-part silicone. It allowed me to pull plugs from these chambers and measure the chamber face to the leading edge. And this was done in multiple methods with multiple measurement instruments, and then the average of 3 different measurements then measured. And what I concluded was that out of 6 different barrels, both standard SAAMI and CIP match chambers for factory barrels as well as match chambers, is that only 2 out of the 6 chambers actually matched what the SAAMI specification is on the papers that you can see here. So unfortunately, it seems like the chambers has just as much variability in them as your headspace would be in terms of your bolts. And it would make sense, just the same as your bolt recess, that there's a variability between rifle to rifle, that the chamber depth that's cut into the barrels has got a variability in it as well, which means that every single rifle, if they come out of the same factory, would have a slightly different engagement with that leading edge or with the rifling. So the measurement of this headspace affects not only that, but how far you engage. And for 2 identical rifles, it might be different. So again, I've done this for match barrels, I've done this for SAAMI spec barrels, and pulling different plugs and measuring all of them showed me that doing this sort of research is key to find out what is actually affecting the consistency. Now, some smiths will actually tell you that a certain amount of jump or just touching the landing grooves might be better. Some might show you that it's full-on engravement of the rifling itself on the bullet is needed. And from my personal anecdotal experience, I've done a bit of testing around to this, and I've blueprinted some of the bullets, pushed them all the way into some of these chambers, and measured what the engagement was. And funny enough, most of the more modern match chamber barrels, they seem to, at least aftermarket match chamber barrels, seem to not have an engraving. They literally just touch the leading edge of the actual chamber itself, but when you pull the bullet out, there is no visible engraving that you could find on the bullet itself. Whereas if you measured something like the factory Begara barrels, this one is an old barrel that I took apart. Unfortunately, I damaged it because, as Murphy would have it, this was one of my more accurate barrels that I've had before I knew anything. And what that ended up doing is it had like a 1/4 inch, if not more, of engagement, and it's pretty much just the last band on the bullet that didn't have any engagement with the rifling. Now, what that means in terms of accuracy, I don't know yet, or I should say precision. That's part 2 of this video, where we'll do some experiments around that. But what my conclusion is around this video is that if you have a headspace set and your rifle barrel and your headspace engraves the barrel, or engraves your bullet to a point where you can actively visibly see the rifling, headspace is probably less important, because what's happening is, as the bullet is pushed forward, it doesn't really change whether you are engaged by 1 thou, 2 thou, 3 thou. You are engaged. There's physically no jump for that bullet to get into the rifling. But if you have a slightly newer chamber where it just seems like you have a 10 thou or 20 thou engagement, there could possibly be a scenario in which you didn't set your headspace, and there's a bit of a jump. And as far as I know, rimfire doesn't like any jump in their projectiles, unlike centerfire. So, and if that wasn't confusing enough, the last thing I found that the Headspace effects is actually your bolt's ability to extract rounds, both live and empty. And basically what happened was, this is the factory CZ bolt. And because I started having problems with extraction, I bought the Desert Precision Gunworks Talent extractors, but my results was not great. Basically what ended up happening was, although the extractors was able to pull live rounds and empty shells out of the chamber, there was a bit of play between the two here. And before, when I was extracting, the round would actually come out of the face before it hit the extractor, which would then dump it empty into my action, which would cause issues. And from engaging with Kenny and everybody in support, it seemed like I was just one out of a million that seemed to have this issue. And for a while there, I went back to my factory extractors, which actually worked well. And it turned out that with the factory extractors, if you set your headspace to 41 thou or 40 thou and you shot Ely, it worked perfectly fine. It was able to extract Ely every single time, no issue. But I had issues with SK and Lapua. Then I revisited the DPG set, and what I found was, it seemed like the pressure between the 2 points was not enough to hold on to this round as I was extracting it. And the way I solved that was with a little tip from one of the local smiths, which told me that if you get a little spring, if you take one of these apart, you'll see there's a cutout over there, and by normal there is nothing installed in there. But if you take the set out, you can see that there's a pathway in there, and by installing that spring, just cut to the right length, you could actually apply more pressure to the extractor set in front here, and that solved my problems. Now I can extract Ely, SK, anything I want without losing any sort of hold onto this round right there. So works great now, extracts bullet and like throws the empties and live bullets like 3 or 4 meters. And so what's the takeaway here? Well, unfortunately it means that, at least to me, Headspace is a lot more nuanced than a set it and forget it number. And it's probably up to you, because obviously only you would know whether you have a factory barrel, a match barrel, whether your headspace for your recess allows you to set the headspace anywhere from 38 thou all the way up to 45 thou, for instance. But what it does mean is that you should probably care about your headspace, even if it is just to know whether headspace is a factor for you. So I'm hoping this video was informational for you. It certainly was to me. I'm looking forward to actually getting to the range and testing the headspace, at least on the selection of samples that I have, to see what difference it makes, if it makes any difference. What my takeaway is from this video, you guys might have seen the post on the channel. I have a new barrel that I'll be fitting to the Rimex action, and for that specific chamber, I'll get between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch of actual rifle engagement to try and avoid some of these headspace issues and stuff that we discussed. Whether that's going to work, I don't know, but my experience with my Bigara and with the MTRs, it certainly tells me that it's a way to go. So only time will tell. Anyway, if you guys like this sort of content, consider subscribing, drop a comment. I'd like to hear what your think or thoughts is on Headspace, and whether you've actually measured yours. So until next time, cheers.